Welcome back to the channel, guys. So this week for our battle report we're going for Chain of Command, which is a first. So we are also playing a battle in the Hurtgen Forest. Our forces consist of a German platoon with support options of an artillery barrage, a PaK-40 and a heavy machine gun, and the British have brought a Sherman and a Bren carrier with them. So the battlefield itself, Hurtgen Forest, is very wooded, so the whole battlefield is considered wood, so that's limiting the vision. There are hills dotted around it with few streams and fallen trees, rocky outcrops. Really, it's a defender's paradise. And yeah, it's going to be a hard one for both sides. We've decided that we're going to have a patrol battle where both sides are going to patrol onto the field, and rather than having an attack defend style game. Our start is going to be slightly different to traditional Chain of Command, in that our patrol phase we just have scout units on the table rather than moving the usual patrol markers based on whatever number of supports you choose at the beginning of the game. So for the British, their support was the, or I should say reconnaissance vehicle, was the Bren carrier, whilst for the Germans they'd chosen a sniper. And so both units basically move forwards until they're within engagement range, and at that point they become locked down, and that's where the jump off point starts. My homebrew rule is that your scout units can move again, and obviously wherever they stop, if they stop for a whole 2 turns, they can create a new jump off point at that point, so it can keep the game going. If they move around a flank or get into a good position, then they can create a real issue for the opponent. Anyway, at the start, so from the central jump off point for the Germans, they had a section form, and then they just brought on a reserve section coming up the main road. The British brought on their mortar platoon to try and start smoking them out. Mortar troop, and jumping out of the Bren carrier was a section, and they decided they're going to try and assault up the hill to dislodge the Germans who they've found to be there. So they left their Bren gun team with the transport, whilst the infantry themselves, the assault element, move across the road and start making their way up the hill. The German reinforcements have started to come onto the field and do have some lines of sight onto the British, so it's not going to be an easy one. The Germans on top of the hill are dug in behind tree trunks, and the sniper there has decided he's going to move on and see if he can find another good location. At this stage, the British brought on their Sherman tank to try and get a bit of extra support in the field, try and blow the Germans out of their defences. So far as the game had moved along, the British had taken a real pounding here in the centre. As their section moved across the road, they got caught by the German machine gun, which just set up down on the road itself and just sort of cut them to pieces. The troops on top of the hill fired down and massacred them. They lost about 2/3 of the assault element, so they broke and were running back down the hill just as the Sherman arrived to try and give them a bit of close support. Having seen the Sherman tumbling down the road, the Germans took their opportunity to bring out their PaK-40, which is in the top right hand corner behind the tree, and the two of them started dueling over the next few turns, firing shots backwards and forwards. neither being able to eliminate the other. German infantry in the top right there started to swing left to try and gain a better arc of fire onto the Bren carrier and those troops that were left. So the machine gunner set up whilst the infantry started moving forwards. Smoke was deployed to give them some cover. As those broken troops in the centre withdrew, the platoon leader went over and tried to rally them, just to try and get them back into the fight before they fled off the table. He also brought up a new machine gun team, a Bren team, who he sent up the centre to try and suppress the Germans on the hill. The platoon leader was able to rally that troop, or that fire team I should say, because that's all that's left of them. This phase you can see that the German machine gun which was on the road is no more, so the Bren carrier with its Vickers opened up along with the Bren team and wiped them out. It was also in this turn that the German sniper had reached his location. You can just see him in the foreground there behind the rocks, and was deploying, or had just deployed, a new jump off point when a bad thing happened and enemy aircraft came in and dropped a bomb on top of him. That was the end of the German sniper. But luckily he'd done his job and he'd deployed a new jump off point further up the field. But yep, there he goes. And then tumbling out from that jump off point was, at this stage, just a section. But then in due course there'll also be a heavy machine gun and the platoon leader himself. So seeing the threat that this new German position is posing, it was time for the British to begin to bring in some reinforcements themselves. But before that, you can see how on this side the Germans were very close to assaulting. So off went the grenades, in came the bayonets, rifle butts, and yeah, they would be assaulting to take that position. But first the Germans on the left hand side pushed forwards. They were going to do an outflanking manoeuvre and try and take out that Bren team, who had the section up on the centre of the hill pinned. But at this stage the British brought on their reinforcements that I alluded to earlier in the form of their final section, who were going to push forwards and try and throw them back. So Bren team up, and then he can start suppressing, well, hopefully not just suppressing, but hopefully killing German troops. Unfortunately, he didn't do too well in getting any casualties, but he did do a few pin markers, so there was some semblance of decency from that turn. The assault on the left from the Germans, though, was overwhelming, and they destroyed the Bren team. Yeah, so that wasn't too good. The Bren carrier, that managed to mount up, and they sort of started to reverse out of there. So that wasn't destroyed, luckily. But the position was taken, and yeah, with the loss of that jump-off point, the British were forced back. It was kind of a full frontal assault for the Germans. Over here, the heavy machine gun opened up and wiped out the Bren team. In the centre, the Bren team on the hill started to take some pins and started to become less and less effective. And so the British started to try and pull back as much as they could. And it was at about this stage that the Germans started pushing forwards with the section on this flank, having had the heavy machine gun in reserve, just sort of keeping the enemy's heads down. The infantry were now free to actually manoeuvre. As you might be able to see, I am playing solo this week. Unfortunately, I was unwell, so instead of exposing my usual gaming partners to it, I decided I would just stay home and play on myself. But I'm more or less back to normal now, thank goodness. It wasn't particularly pleasant. So the British troops on the right are withdrawing back to the sort of defensive area around, you can see the timbers there. On the left they're pulling back in some semblance of order, but the Germans are in hot pursuit pretty well across the table now. So they've just taken the position. Pack 40 is still banging shots down and just got a penetrating hit, but not enough to destroy the Sherman. But the Sherman's definitely shaken. So there goes the Bren team pulling back. Sherman's pulled back. The Bren carrier pulled back, but then took a hit from the Pack 40 that made the crew bail out. Although the vehicle wasn't destroyed, they just bailed out because they were shaken by it. At this stage, the game was pretty well over, although I wanted to just keep going to see how it would go. I'm thinking of actually expanding this into a campaign, so again it could have knock-on effects depending on how they did. But yes, the British were in full withdrawal. They hadn't routed, which was good, but they were definitely withdrawing. They'd taken heavy casualties, and to be honest, they hadn't really inflicted much on the Germans. The Germans had lost a handful, I think, by the end of it. They'd had about a section destroyed total, and that was between the free sections and the additional support options that they'd brought on, so very little casualties really. Whilst the British, on the other hand, had had an entire section wiped out, a second section which took about 75% casualties, Bren team almost wiped out, Bren carrier not destroyed but knocked out. Yeah, it was pretty well total destruction for the British, and the Germans got away pretty light. So this is my first of the World War II games, and I actually really enjoyed it. So thanks if you watched to the end. Please like, subscribe, and please leave some comments about what you want to see next. Thanks, guys.